Welcome everyone to Artful Design Television, COVID-19 edition. We are online and in quarantine. I'm your host, Ge Wang. With me is Kung Woo Kim, our co-producer and also co-host. And as always, you can find us at artful.design/TV, and where there's a lot of material and as well as an archive of episodes from the past. And for those of you joining us for the first time, we are a multi-format weekly series encompassing artful design, music, coding, critical making with helpings of history and philosophy and life check-ins. No experience needed, all are welcome. And as always, we are an ongoing experiment. I barely know what I'm doing really at any given moment. And Artful Design TV is no different. And as always, we are open and in fact craving of your feedback and suggestions to help us improve. And there's a button at the bottom of almost every page in artful.design/TV that says feedbacks and suggestions. Please feel free to hit that button and tell us both what we can do better, but also ideas for things we can do in the future. And the reason we're soliciting this extra today is because today happens to be actually the end of what we're calling season 1. This is our season 1 finale. After this, we're actually going to take a brief break, a vacation, if you will. I don't think any of us, Kung Woo, Jack, and I are necessarily going anywhere physically, but we're going to take the time to reassess and plan for next season, as well as to attend to a few other things, as well as to just vacate a bit. And with this, let's actually do one more check-in for season 1. How are you doing? How are you feeling? And there's so many emotions, I think that seem to be happening at the same time during these times. And as immobile as we all may be sheltering in place, this is a time I think that it's nothing short of feeling things. So if you'd like, maybe tell us how you're feeling today. And please continue to keep using chat to, throughout this, and to let your thoughts be known, and to just, take a moment for us to all, take a deep breath and to take stock of where we are. We're like, something like 100 and by my count, like 110 something days into shelter in place, at least here in California. So, and I thought we actually use this time to look back a bit before we get to the main topic of the day, and to look back on this first season, this rather ad hoc season of Artful Design TV COVID-19 edition. And I think throughout the season, we're trying to tell a story. And it's a story about design. And it began with this question: why do we design? For what do we design? You might remember we talked starting from the design of toilets through the ages to the smartphone. We question what drives which. Is it a necessity that drives invention, or is it an invention that then births further necessities, or is it both? We then looked at somewhat unnecessary inventions, things that no one exactly asked for. This is the Personal Space Nader pre-COVID-19 edition, to Simone Giertz's loving commentary on technology, to things like Ocarina, toys and games that, well, again, no one asked for, but that was built because I think we believe that music making is good. We visited with Zen Masters of Computer Music Design, Perry Cook, in his studio in Oregon. He showed us zany inventions to audio-visual design. We looked at exquisite cities made of music. This is Kung Woo's MIDI.City. That was from episode 3. To Anne Hagee, helping us to think about bodies in the room, about the medium of the laptopera, and about what it's trying to say about cycles of violence that perpetuate in our world, and what we can do to try to break out of these cycles of violence. to VR, asking why do we build stuff in VR, with the Karma VR Lab, to the Chuck programming language, and music for making a language for making music, but also for building audio into Unity, and to Doa, leading us on exploring new interfaces for musical expression, to exploring different approaches to design with James Landay, from design thinking to human-centered design to artful design, the ways in which they're different and ways in which they share commonalities, to the Laptop Orchestra, where Dan Truman took us back to the origins of how it started, and to the history of Karma at Stanford, and kind of why we make computer music, with technical director Matt Wright, and thinking about why do we do what we do, what is it that we actually do, and also why do we make art? You know, in the dark times, will there be singing? Yes, there will also be singing about the dark times. And more recently, we began threads on artificial intelligence, asking what do we really want from AI? And to think that, you know, we as engineers, as designers, may have way more power than we think. Power to shape people's behaviors, to shape culture, to create new contexts with the things we make. As Rebecca Fiebrink gave, I think, a compelling and powerful account and reasoning of how we might think of AI not as both as something to fix in terms of the ways that it could be very broken and amplifying our darker sides, but also what are some positive visions we can actually have in terms of how we might live with our technologies, to folk design, to building things for ourselves and those around us, and why this is such an important part of who we are, to last week, where we talked about video games, but from this idea of play is something that we do, not just because we're having to be free, but play is what we do to be free. And to this notion of the sublime, to really seeking a kind of clarity about through the things we make, whether it's video games, whether it's tools, toys, all of that. So I think this comes back to this question, you know, why do we design? And in a way, I think the hidden dimension in all of this throughout the last 14, 15 weeks actually has been something of an ethical dimension. And I think that's the hidden dimension, I think, in Artful Design TV, is that we're actually not just here to think about the things we build. We're, of course, here to think about why we build the things we build and why we do them in the way that we do them. And the ethical dimension is both concerned with how do we build tools that are just and that avoids doing harm, but in equal measure, and perhaps even in greater balance. I think the ethical questions that we've been asking is how do we actually envision a world in which we would actually want with the things we actually build, with the tools that we make? How do we live with our technologies? That is no less an ethical question than all the others. Because at the end of the day, design is all about choices. So that is actually a kind of a compressed collage of what we've been talking about in this first season. And that brings us to today's thinking about stuff. And we're very fortunate to have with us Eifler to talk with us about how art makes better tech. If there's ever a better question that we could ask in the context of why do we design? Why do we make art? Why do we do anything at all? I think this might be it. And to moderate this conversation, we have joining us once again Jack Atherton. And before we check in with them directly, I want to read a bio for M. This is from their website, blinkpopshift.com. And M. Eifler is an artist and leader in XR design. Their art makes legible the systems which create and control our behaviors, communities, and worlds. Working in a collage of performance, sculpture, video, and virtual and augmented reality technology, they strive to make art embodied. As an XR designer and researcher, they're currently focused on creating a set of embodied cognition fundamentals for XR operating systems and creative tools. M is a vocal, disabled, non-binary, and queer person interested in in-betweens, chimeras, and gray areas. And with that, Em and also Jack, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hello.
And how are you doing today?
That's a good question. My back is sore. I am nicely cool. The air temperature is perfect. And I'm excited to be here.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And Jack, how are you doing?
I am doing very well. I have a lot of energy because I drank too much caffeine.
Usually, you're someone that you've told us who doesn't drink a lot of coffee usually. So you're kind of experiencing the rare coffee jolt, as it were.
Yes.
And Em, tell us what are you painting there?
So I started this series in December, I think. Yeah. I had just started reading the newspaper for the first time, and like physical paper, because I just hate getting my news through Twitter. So I left Twitter and I got the physical newspaper, and then I ended up with like all these paper materials in my house, which I really love. So I started making these just massive. Um, they're like 10-foot
Wow.
long, 8-foot tall paintings. And each one of them is made from a few weeks worth of papers, and sort of around the edges are all of the sort of, at this point, pandemic related headlines all around the edges. So they become sort of my personal archive of the pandemic made into these just massive paintings. So it's been an interesting way to try and remember quarantine and try and remember this time when time feels like nothing. Time feels like not a thing anymore. So it's one of the practices I've been doing to keep myself in material and sort of change my relationship to the news and give me like a really literal way to like process the news like through this process. So yeah, that's what I'm painting.
Fascinating. I mean, the writing is literally on the wall here for something, right? And but also, I'm struck by the non-digital nature of this, and by it not being non by it being non-digital. This is something that exists in like such a different way, and
Mm-hmm.
it's right, and it's present. It's physical. It's looking back at you in a way, right? That's what it feels like through the camera.
Yep, it takes up my whole living room. It's present
Yeah,
all the time. Um,
fascinating.
it has like its own sound, like the crinkly noise of paper and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely kept me off the screens, which in our new screen only all the time lives is like a good it's a good place for me to be to like settle
This
into my
is
fingers.
I love that. I mean, I'm gonna start trying to do something like that. I don't have I don't know what I can do. Maybe I should, but something physical, right? Just sketching, doodling, because I think Zoom fatigue is like a real thing. That's something that I think we're all experiencing, just screen fatigue. Um, but this is such a artful way to kind of to be while having the screen in front of you. Um, and I thought we'd actually, what we do here is I'm going to go back and share screen into to kind of see the rest of our conversation. Um, and all of this is really connected here. Uh, I thought I'd provide a bit of context for kind of our conversation, how art makes better tech. And in the, you have these two Medium articles that are in our view really profound, and we're not the only ones thinking that, because these are very popular articles. In the article, You're Doing Mixed Reality Wrong, and you began with this section titled Mixed Virtual Augmented, I don't care what you call it. Immersive wearable computing is still in a malleable phase, and I refuse to let the next era of computational interfaces mature into yet another body-blind, brain-draining, antisocial tool. And this is such a powerful statement. And I thought we'd actually, maybe Jack and I would just ask you kind of, yeah, tell us more about how you think about this and maybe how you think about this today.
I I always make when I'm writing, I always sound quite like militant about things, which I'm enjoying right now. Uh, a lot of what I've experienced in virtual reality in the last, I think it's 5 or 6 years, has been like um, mostly focused on gaming, mostly focused on a way to sort of like take you out of where you are and um, give you a simulation of another environment without really considering how that environment reacts to and responds to your environment, including like your internal environment of feelings and hormones and your physical environment of like the sensation of the world, and then like the physical environment around you of like how you walk around and stuff. And I think like I so hate the way that the internet has become um, sort of diluted but also concentrated down to Twitter, Instagram, Reddit. Like they, this tool that could be used in like a really diverse set of ways has sort of like been simplified down to like a few sets of things, and then those few sets of communication methods are owned by very particular platforms. If you like TikTok and you like the way interacting on that platform works, that means that you also have to sort of participate in this now like a spy network or something. Like there's no way to like really interact with these things in like a really rich way. So I have been really desperate for that not to happen to VR, for it not to just become a gaming platform, for us to use it in the way that I find enriching, which is that your body is involved, your brain is involved, and you use it as a way to connect with other people, a way to connect with the world, and not yet another way to like bludgeon each other with our opinions, I guess.
I love that, and I think the way you're describing that, we have managed to distill kind of much of our interactions down to just a few set of tools, which you could question also the motivations behind, the imperatives behind these tools. Are they here to actually better our lives, or are they here for the makers to actually make a lot of money? Which, I mean, I think there's a fine line between being cynical and being critical, but I think whether you're cynical or you're critical, and I choose to be critical to the extent that I can, right? And
Yeah.
it still feels like the economic imperative drives so much of the tools we actually use, the social tools we use, and which ironically, they end up being, as you say, body blind, brain draining, and antisocial. And I think, and I think this article, for example, you have here, was directly addressing in a whatever you call it, XR, VR, AR kind of a context. What can we begin to do to combat that? And for this, I've taken the liberty of purloining a few photos from your article, in which you talk about kind of this idea that if a desktop metaphor versus what you have been working with for the last few years, which you call a studio metaphor. And in the studio metaphor, as I understand it, is really this, like, really thinking about, rather than us looking uncomfortably at our desktop, at our laptop, or our phone right in front of us, this is really an environment that is, in a way, the entire environment is part of the working environment. And you can actually work in whatever way, the context calls for, or in whatever way you feel like in a moment. All of these ways are valid, but also they're just part of the system, right? And I don't know if I have that right, but that's kind of at least my understanding. And
yeah, so studio metaphor was originally developed because at the time I sort of worked in this group that had been collected by Alan Kay, who was one of the sort of originators of desktop metaphor, and this idea that like you could sort of take an environment from the world that people were used to working in, a desk, and you could use that interaction model to sort of like slurp it up into computing. And it worked really well. But as you try to stretch that metaphor to include phones, which we have mostly done, phones, there are a few instances where it's not exactly the same, but phones mostly conform to the extension of desktop. But when you start to really think about like, okay, well, what environment do we want to slurp into this new technology, this new interaction model? There's a lot of ones you can go with, right? Like you can think of a factory model. You can think of like a park ranger with a vehicle that like moves around an environment. There's a lot of different ones. And so for me, I chose to sort of start with an environment that let me move my body into lots of different positions and stay in those positions for shorter periods of time and then move into new ones. So we had this basically this is a kindergarten. We called it VR kindergarten at the time, and you basically like have all this different malleable environment. You can move the blocks around, there's little tables, the floor is very squishy, and that environment is what we based studio metaphor on. So once you had this malleable, comfortable environment, and I will admit that it is not great for people who have difficulty standing up and sitting down again. And we had we were developing some ideas for how to integrate a more accessible version of this environment. But at the time, it was, okay, so if I have this malleable environment, how do I interface this, like how do I design software around that malleable body environment? So, you know, suddenly we're moving a lot more, and what does that mean to my software? Because now I can't do a thing where like I put a screen in front of you. Like if any of you have used the Oculus Quest, you put it on, what happens is they put you inside of this ski lodge for some reason, and then in front of you there's a giant screen. Or maybe you've used like Tilt Brush, and you bring up the controls, and what happens is that the control gets essentially glued to your hand. You can rip them off and stick them in the environment, but there's still these like sort of phone-looking rectangle things. So, okay, we have this malleable environment, our bodies are moving around, but we can't just stick to phones. I stuck some phones and computer screens inside of this headset, and now it works great. So instead, what we went with was a thing that you, software, a piece, like a little chunk, basically, of software. And the one that I developed first was I forgot what it was called. Oh, a podcast app, basically something to play audio.
We have a video of that, by the way.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, this is what I'm talking about, variable viewpoint. It's like, once you're moving around, the software has to accommodate that motion, meaning that any piece of the software can be used in any position, which is where we got variable viewpoint from. If you want to lay down, if you want to walk around, if you want to be indoors, if you want to be outdoors, all of those things lead to needing there to be this variable viewpoint. But yeah, if you want to play the video, or I can keep talking either way.
Actually, one question for you before we go to the video is that if you, for example, if you look at the photo on the left, right, and you describe this briefly in your article, is that there are things on the ground, for example, objects, and you're meant to, operate in this metaphor, for example, without shoes, right? And so, and the idea is that these things on the ground actually give you additional physical cues as to your actual location in the physical room, as well as how that could map into like a virtual environment. And I found that to be, that seems to be like a way to somehow, I don't know, connect the VR with kind of a physical reality type of thing, or?
Yeah, we used so you could basically, even like blindfolded, you could tell where you were in the room by the way that the floor underneath you, like the orientation of the mats on the floor underneath you. And then we also had these extremely brightly colored things, because if you have worn a headset before, you know that you're not actually blindfolded. Like you can see through the nose hole a little bit, or you can like, bump the headset with your hand a little bit. And so having really brightly colored environmental objects help you, like if you want furniture, in air quotes, for example, you're looking for something that's bright orange. So you can orient in the environment with far less sight and like much more physical than you would if you were in sort of like an office environment. So that's why the sort of floor and the coloring is oriented like that. This is my doggo.
Yeah.
My doggy.
Too bad not all studio models will come with a doggy.
Pre-installed dog.
Pre-installed dog. So let me go ahead and play the video. And yes, this is kind of this concept that you've termed variable viewpoint. And what I'm going to do here is actually to give the best quality.
Hi all, this is Eifler. I'm here to give you a walkthrough of the podcast app I made for explorations in embodied software paradigms. Here you can see the first scale of the software, wearable. It's an earring-sized piece that you can tap to change just the on and off switch of the audio. This is the holdable scale piece. You can see along the top edge there are sculptural icons for the various different podcast episodes that are going along the playlist in the outside ring. On the front, there's the start and stop buttons that you see in the wearable version. There's also the timeline functionality and the volume knob in the middle. As you turn it to the back, you'll see this door, and that door is what teleports you inside of the habitable scale app, or version of the app. The thing that we're inside of right now is the habitable scale. Let me just back up here so you can see it from the outside. You'll see that it resembles the holdable scale and habitable scale, or holdable and wearable scales, but now we're at full room sized. The same sculpture icons are on the outside ring of this version as well as the holdable version. So when you change things in the holdable version, it would also change things in the habitable version. So let's go back inside and I can show you some of the functionality that is just in the habitable size. Here you see the library. These are all of the podcasts that I am subscribed to, a bunch of my favorite. Put Your Hands Together with Cam and Rhea, KALW's Cross Currents, Bad with Money, Radiolab, Buffering the Vampire Slayer, and you would be able to pick up sculptural icons from the library and snap them onto that outside ring to add them to your podcast feed or playlist. Here's the newest episodes section. They come in through this little pipeline here, and the sculptural icons are dropped down into this little bucket, where also you'd be able to grab them out of the bucket and snap them onto your playlist. You can see here the Bad with Money one is already on my current playlist. Let's go around. Here is the recommendations section. You'll see that this is not completely full, but a few podcasts that I would highly recommend to people are here. Containers, Gastropod, Melanin Millennials, and then continuing around you'll see the search area where you'd be able to search for the title of any podcast, get the sculptural icon, and snap it onto your playlist. If you'd like to see more about this piece, head on over to LVR.com and search for Studio Metaphor and Embodied Software Paradigm. I go into more detail about how this specific podcast app would work, but also how it relates to a greater VR software paradigm or ecosystem.
Wonderful. So there's a couple of things I immediately take away from this, and let me get out of the screen share here. And this is something that we found to be also extremely useful as a way to think about this, is this idea that you have of this 3 scale of thinking about UX design. And I think those are wearable, holdable, and habitable, right? And it seems like, to me, my interpretation, let me know if that sounds, if I'm close. Wearable seems to be, the smallest, but they're also the most personal, and they're like almost like a hat or something you put on, and they kind of move with you just by virtue of being what they are, and you've kind of put them on your person. And whereas the holdable seems to be more interactive, and this is almost like a thing you would think of as a tool that you would manipulate and interact with. And then the habitable is more like your environment, but that can be navigated and you consider it to be in the environment rather than holding a tool, right? And I don't know, that seems to be at least kind of our understanding. Is that
Yeah, and I didn't show it in this video, but you'll see that like the holdable scale component of the software can be modified either from, you know, the wearable or habitable scale. Or, for example, you could have two habitable scale environments next to each other. Like, say you wanted to do a 3D modeling, you were using your 3D modeling software, but you also wanted maybe the unity scene or something that you were modeling for. You could have that open, you could walk in between them so that you could sort of arrange in one and model in another. Or another example is in this environment, I'm using the tool version of the same software that I'm inside. But you could also imagine using the tool version of a different software while you're in that app. For example, maybe you are publishing your own podcast and you want to quickly make a logo for that podcast without leaving the podcast app because you're trying to upload it to this feed. So you just quickly whip out your 3D modeling tool, you make some sort of basic logo, and you stick it on there. And that flow of data between the different scales also happens sort of like between different versions or between different software blobs. I guess I'll call them blobs. Yeah, software blobs.
So they're not really hard categories at all. They're the things you flow through, and in terms of how you could design any particular affordance or whatever you want. I guess the other part that struck me in the context of, I think your article goes on to talk about this idea of embodiment and embodied computing, and to me it seems like all three of these have a very strong affinity towards being embodied. Wearable is embodied by virtue, I think, of just wearing them, of being. Holdable seems to be embodying through interaction. Like if you like a tool that you just feel like is good to use, and if it does, then it's embodying the sense the tool feels then like an extension of you rather than a thing apart from you. And the habitable makes me think about, well, is just kind of this idea of inhabiting an environment, and which means I think you are convinced you're there, you're comfortable being there. In fact, you're so comfortable you feel like you belong there, and this sense of belonging, like for example, I think this is why we say we're inhabitants of our homes. If hopefully a home is a place where you would feel comfortable, is because you feel comfortable and like you belong there. So in a way, I feel like there's a strong sense of embodiment that you, with the way that you have done this, and I wonder if you want to say more about kind of this embodiment aspect.
Yeah, I think what do I want to point to? When you're looking for something in a desktop metaphor environment, you have three options. One is completely linguistic. You go to the search bar, you type in Photoshop, it pops up, you use it. So there's like an entirely linguistic model. Then there's a 2D search field model, which is spatial in a very minor way, but not entirely embodied. So that's like you have the shortcut to Photoshop saved on your desktop in a particular space, and you know to go to the upper right-hand corner every time you want Photoshop. The trash truck is outside. I apologize if it's loud. And then the other model is this tree, right? So you start on your desktop, you open a file folder, you search sort of like through different themes, and you go down through this tree. So we have like a basic, we have a highly linguistic, a tree-based, and a basic spatial one. But if you're looking for your wallet, you don't use any of those. You don't use any of those models for search to look for your wallet. You don't even engage, you're not engaging a linguistic thing to like reach your hand behind your body and like stick your hand in your pocket. Or let's say you have a bag and like you without looking, you know the interior of this object well enough to just stick your hand in it and then like retrieve the thing that you need, because you can feel the texture of that thing when you touch it. So there's a bunch of different ways that embodied computation can take a search. Sorry, there's a bunch of different like search types that embodied computation can take advantage of. There, proprioceptive. There's the one that people always call the memory palace, where like I left a thing somewhere in this house, I can like navigate to that place and get the thing. So proprioceptive is the one that's on your body, and that's the wearable scale one is where you always like I always know my podcast thing is on this elbow, so I just grab it off my elbow. I never think about I never convert it into linguistic knowledge. And then the holdable scale one, like once you have an object, there's an object I can hold. Here we go. I have this spray bottle. This is a tool for applying water in like a few different ways, but I don't really think about it in like a spatial way. I just sort of like I grab it with my hand. It has this little squeezy bit. It has this setting here that I can twist. And all of that knowledge is sort of in my hands, right? So that's another sort of model of search that only applies to holdable. And then the last one is more, like, how did I describe it? Like stations. So if in an artist studio, which is why we call it studio metaphor, you often have different stations for doing different things. So I'm going to pick you up for a second to like move you around, but so like this is my living room, and we have sort of the going outside station where all the going outside objects are. We have the reading and watching TV station where all the books, the TV, and like the giant couch are. We have the making painting station where all the painting supplies are, and then we have the like big open area for doing dance and other stuff like that. So you're not exactly doing the search through an entire physical space. Like I was saying with like I lost a thing in my house, it's like a different, that's more of a place cell oriented search method. But the station one is where objects tend to collect in places where you do a certain kind of activity. So those are the sort of basic differences between desktop metaphor, search, find, do, and embodied metaphor or studio metaphor, search, find, and do.
That's such a clarifying and useful model, and it's very powerful. And this came out of years of you researching in this. For example, part of LVR, which sadly is no longer around. But I guess I for one just want to say thank you for actually distilling all of this down into such a clear model for us to actually get our heads around, and literally to get our bodies and hands and bodies around, and to get ourselves around. So thank you on multiple fronts. And I for this we thought is so clearly we've been thinking very hard about kind of these ideas that you've put forth. And what I thought we might do here is to think about this idea of wearable, holdable, and habitable in terms of these different scales of UX design within VR in the context of a piece that was done in VR, something we briefly talked about in a previous episode, and that's Jack's 12th sentiment for VR. And for this, Jack, maybe I'm going to turn the steering wheel to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so if you remember, 12 sentiments for VR is this emotional life cycle of a plant. And there are all these separate scenes where you sort of embody either a part of the plant or the plant community or the wind or the earth or all these different things. And if you analyze it post hoc in this framework, there are some things that it does well and some things it doesn't do well. So I thought I could just give like a brief example of maybe each of the three scales, and then we can see what M thinks of my examples. So the first one, if you go forward a slide, is I'm going to talk about wearable scale. So here, like, your hands kind of become these leaves, and you're like putting them out into rays of sunlight. And so this is like the leaves are kept on your avatar. You don't really have very many means of interaction. You're just moving your hands around. But like having your hands be leaves modifies your senses because you can hear the sunlight when it's hitting your leaves, and you can also feel it as a haptic vibration.
So this would be an example of wearable, because these are virtually your hands, and by how you move your hands, these leaves cannot help but actually move along with you, and in that sense, the connection is made, right?
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you want to say about this?
Yeah, it's interesting the way like modifying your simulated sensory organs via a wearable component,
Uh-huh.
like the way that it's not just yeah, I guess in this case especially wearables are not just like a thing that you use for a thing, but a thing that changes something about how you are in the world.
Yeah.
Right. So this is it's form giving in the virtual sense, and it's also like, it seems like it really helps to give you your sense of being in the world, which I think is what wearables could be about, is like, who am I? What am I?
Mm-hmm. Avatar modification and giving yourself like different kinds of bodies, and like how those different kinds of bodies mean different things about the world that you're like in, and how you can be in that world.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Next I wanted to give a couple of different examples of holdable things. And so in 12 sentiments, all the interactions are very dumbed down, I guess, because it's meant to be sort of like an introductory thing. And so all you have to remember about the world outside of VR is that you're holding something, and you can push any button on the thing that you're holding, and then that will like make something happen. And so in this one, you're like holding down something to spawn a lot of seedlings, and then releasing it to generate them into the world. And so these flowers are like tools for spawning seedlings, I guess. And the second example is maybe more illustrative, because I think another of the components of the holdable scale is more body scale, body size interactions. Doga, if you could play the next video. What you can imagine is that you have these hands that are wind clouds, and basically your interaction is that you stir up wind, and then you do this full body like arm motion to release it in a certain direction.
There we go.
Yeah, so those were the like full body interactions I was talking about. And
Yeah, like in the one with the leaves, the tool is essentially modifying you, and in this case, we see you modifying the world.
yeah, yeah. And then on the habitable scale, I think there's sort of more of an emphasis on like being in a navigable environment, and you go around to different places. So here in the seventh movement, you, as the wind, instead of just like moving the ceilings a little bit, you're sort of controlling how they move through the world. You're going around and visiting all the different trees.
Let's see. Let me go back here and see what happens when I play.
Fingers crossed.
All right.
So that's maybe like a hybrid model between like holdable, wind, and habitable. I don't really know how to think about that.
Well, I think like the tool that you are using is holdable, but
Yeah.
like you're almost always like in VR, especially going to be in a habitable environment.
Yeah.
But the habitable environment, at least in this case, is not the thing that you are doing changes with. It's the thing you're doing changes to using the tool.
Yeah. Um, God, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, it struck me that this actually is one of those things that kind of has a bit of the holdable and a lot of the habitable, and it's kind
Mm-hmm.
of somewhat of both. And I like thinking, and also the other thing I want to say is that just that like 10 seconds of it put me like at peace. Like I don't know about any of y'all, but I don't know. I mean, like, there's so many things wrong with the world, and I think I needed that 10 seconds of just flying.
Whereas
And
I'm over here being like, man, it's really good that the actual wind doesn't have goals because it would be so frustrating to be the wind if you had to have a goal.
exactly. Well, that part we talked about a lot, right? It's like this whole idea of purpose in this, and I think it's so important that this isn't. There's no like mini game mechanic here. You got to collect these things with the wind. No, I think you're just going wherever you want to go. And I think that for me, actually, if there were a mini game to your point, M, I think this would totally be a different game for me, and that sense of calm that I just experienced would be just
Yeah.
obliterated. I would be like, okay,
Yeah.
okay, go. How do we do this mini game? How do we do this mini game? And even I can't help but do that. But if we got no goals, then it's really like taking a walk. And well, anyway, thank you, Jack, for
Yeah.
that unintended consequences. That was a good
Sure,
one
yeah.
for me.
Um, the last thing I wanted to bring up is this idea of like while you're in a habitable scale, the scale of your virtual viewpoint changing over time. So in the 12th movement, you're growing, but you end up growing really, really big. So if you want to play both videos, I can talk
Okay.
over it. You start out real tiny, but when you look up, then you're growing. Can you play the next one also?
Hmm.
So you end up really huge by the end, and you can do things like bend down at the ground and look really close up at where you were before. And so this is sort of like maybe an opposite of variable viewpoint computing, because it's not like you can do the same things from any body position, but more like when you adopt different body positions, you can do different things. But
Mm-hmm.
that might actually be like locking some people out of the experience, which is pretty unfortunate, I guess. But I also just
Yeah,
really
I
like
can see what
going
you
down
mean
and looking.
about like, especially when the environment is this naturalistic one where we're expecting gravity and we're expecting a
Mhm.
horizon and like we expect the orientation to stay the same, that it becomes more like what you're saying of like some body positions give you some some particular interactivity.
Mhm.
So yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about that. Like most of the environments that I have made for myself tend to not be naturalistic. They're just like voids with stuff in them. Um, so it's interesting to think about like if what you want is like the simulation of an outdoor space, then that becomes like, or even a just a naturalistic space or a realistic space, and then you return to having some of those limitations of other models.
Mhm.
But then naturalistic spaces have plenty of things going for them, like architecture helps us organize our thoughts, and rooms with a view, this whole like theory in architecture about like the like being enclosed with a big open view on one side, like really helps people feel comforted. So yeah, it's interesting to sort of bridge these sort of more these concepts that are based more on sort of a a fully software model where like you're not trying to look naturalistic,
Mhm.
with something that people actually want to be inside of often, which includes these more naturalistic scenes.
Mhm.
Haven't done this, actually experienced this in VR. I will say, like the photo of you, Jack, like hunched over, looking down at the tiny plants. I've done that, And that very physical gesture really helps you to feel the scale of things. You really do feel huge, right? But it's because you've made your full body motion to actually bend down and to like literally look. I mean, you can't see what you're looking at here from the outside, but you are absolutely seeing these tiny little plants. And I think the rational knowledge that you were once a little plant, and now you've grown up, and for me, there was something of the sublime in that I had this clarity of like, and it was clarifying. It made me think and made me reflect and made me think about my own growth and my own, whatever you want to call it. But there was a moment for me that there was like a linking of like this being inhabiting this world, but having this meaning that is derived, especially this being, I think, the last movement in 12 Sentiments, right? That this is you can either think of it as the end of this journey, this voyage, or it's the beginning of the next cycle, right? And it's
That's interesting. I wonder how so you're saying that they're like, and I totally agree with this idea that like body motion equals meaning making. And I wonder how like people without that range of motion, like my first instinct is to say like, well, what if you could just like grab your face and stick it down there with your hand or something like that? Would that give you that is a body motion, but it's not the same type? So like, what are the body motions that give people like similar kinds of meaning, but that fit for like a wider range of bodies? Or maybe like one person's meaning making is this grabbing of their face and putting it down there with their hand, or maybe another person's sort of scale change body motion is like flipping from one like head to hip orientation to the other one, or I'd like to explore that more to see like what we have a traditional association of this body motion with this kind of feeling and this kind of meaning making, but maybe there are other ones that we could surprisingly come upon that we wouldn't have realized otherwise.
And I bet if we practice those, they would start to feel more natural if we develop like a literacy for pulling our face off and putting it somewhere else.
I love that idea.
Because there is another example of Zoom is like the swimming motion that is used in some, where you basically grab the air and then you squish it together or pull it apart. Which is, some people have used that in their designs. And like at first it didn't give me the sensation of Zoom. All the Zoom was entirely visual. But over time I could like learn to feel the Zoom and that feeling. So yeah, I don't know. There what if it's inherent? What if it's learned? All that stuff.
Yeah, that's such an excellent point. It would seem that while there are it really depends on the range of motion for each individual that they're capable of and comfortable with. But it seems like, maybe to Jack's point, through practice, whatever motion a person ends up doing, and taking into account their full range of motion, or or how they may not be able to move, but how they end up moving in life in ways that is comfortable for them. Maybe it might be an opportunity to really design around each person with that idea, right? If I'm, for example, it would not be comfortable for me to really hunch over and actually look at this tiny plants on the ground, but I happen to look up a lot, for example. Then that looking up, like this, the meaning of hunching over and looking at things would be less for me because I just don't do that much anymore, for example. But the meaning that's associated with something where I do is, for example, like just looking up at things because I'm just looking up a lot, or maybe I'm just sitting in a chair that affords looking up. And then that looking up like has the physical, it's almost like whatever physical motions someone tend to do naturally with their bodies and with are potential opportunities for that person to create something for that person to actually really have this embodied kind of meaning making through their physical motion.
Yeah, and that's really what I feel like is driving a lot of my work right now, is this like no one size fits all approach to anything. And some of that comes from like the disability community, but it also comes from like, snap together toys and like we're going into a future where AR and MR and the Internet of Things and like all of these technologies become a wide variety of hardwares, and people are all using very different things, and you can sort of customize your technological bouquet, and also the way that your body interacts with that bouquet also like becomes something that you yourself can develop and customize over time, so that it becomes enriching for you and not something that like I as a designer got to be like, I told you to do it, so you got to do it. Like,
Here.
I really love the idea of like using, I don't know, like interactive machine learning to be like, okay, like demonstrate for me what kind of body movement you would equate with like looking down at the ground. And then great, I learned how it is that your body will do this. And then your data just lives on with you, and your experience is a collage of your own data.
Well, I would just snap, clap, and applaud everything that is being said right now. And this actually is. I mean, this is maybe it's a fitting. I mean, like I said, I think this is just such a fitting topic for our season finale of Artful Design TV, because I think this gets at like really the soul of why we build things and how we can build things with soul, right? And I think the final perspective that you offer in the article, You're Doing Mixed Reality Wrong, is this idea of all brain, all body, all bodies. And and again, another, like a set of profound ideas for how we can think about, like, actually employ this and to know why we're doing this in actually building tools with technology. And I before we kind of maybe go back and consider all of this in the context of how art makes better tech, Em, anything you want to say about kind of this idea?
just that we have been really in love with scale for a really long time, and scale has become, or scalability has become, sort of the be all end all goal of a lot of the drive of technology in the world. And I am hoping, shifting into a new paradigm. Like we're in a big upheaval right now, and I think we're going into a technological upheaval in which we center non-exploitative models. We have to adapt to climate change. We have to adapt to ever increasing disease exposure. We have to acknowledge that, like Black communities and the things that they're going through now and have been for a long time. We have to acknowledge the differences between the global North and the global South. There's all of these things, and to me, they all come down to this non-exploitation. And so when we think about non-exploitation in technology, these three things are what seem the most important to me, is that the technology enriches you, physically, mentally, socially, like, and that is what is important to us as people who are making technology tools, that they enrich people's lives, that they don't sort of tether people to devices with the promise of social connection, but which actually are mining them for attention, for example. So yeah, just non-exploitation, and like how centering non-exploitation really changes the entire environment of decision-making around technologies. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm gonna let that hang for just a moment, what you just said, because I think it sounds like if there's one rule that we as designers and technologies one principle that we could choose to adhere to, and everything else would follow. It's kind of this non-exploitation rule. I think this is like, what if that was the baseline of doing business, right? In a way, this is, I think this sounds also like the platinum rule, right? Like, do unto others as they would have you do onto them. And if that was always the way that you went about shaping technology, if that was the way that everyone went about shaping technology, it seems like that would at least be a very good start, a very genuine start, right? So
Yeah.
thank you so much for saying that. And I think with this, brings us back, I think to kind of where we started. And I think, in a way, I think as much as you've told us how art makes better tech, I think in an appropriately embodied fashion, I think you've shown us. And so down to the very artifact that you are constructing right now before our very eyes on your wall. And that, I think, even though it's not our wall, the words that you're putting that on those newspapers have everything to do with every one of us, right? And so there's some connection that I continually feel. So I think, time check, it is 5 minutes past the hour. I think this is a good time. If anyone has any questions or thoughts for M or about any of these things we're talking about, and Jack, any questions that you might have for M or for all of us, feel free to. This would be a good time for that.
Something that I've been wondering is sort of, you have this idea that different of the scales engage different parts of your brain. And I think I'm really curious about, like, let's take, for example, social interaction. That engages one part of your brain. And so maybe you would want the UI for social interaction to engage other parts of your brain. Does that make sense? Like, there might be better scales for different activities.
Yeah, I think when you're like in personal mode, things are a lot more intimate. But if you think about like playground design, playgrounds are designed specifically to enable basically social interaction, but also discoverability and curiosity and being able to manage your sensory input and all these things. So when you're in a social environment, it's not just about like you interfacing with the world or you creating or something. So I definitely think those scales are much more oriented towards like an individual artist, individual creative. But saying, with that said, like, I have worked in environments in VR with other people where we're all remote and we're all like, getting together in VR. And I think the more those people have like that literacy with those scales and like with creative tools, like the more interesting those social environments are to me. I am terrible at hanging out and chatting with people, basically in any online forum. So the way that social environments, especially immersive, embodied social environments, are designed, currently, like VR chat, for example, I just find like it's so chaotic as to be like unusable.
Yeah.
It's definitely like fine for some people. It's just not for me. So for me, a social environment needs to really give me like I'm a very antsy person. I need stuff to use with my hands. I need to be able to manipulate the environment and be able to play. And environments designed for play are environments designed for like healthy social interaction. So I've been doing a lot more research lately about playgrounds, environments designed for early childhood education, those kinds of things, to sort of bring that into adult spheres of social VR interaction and feel like, what does a play first environment look like? And how does, what is an example? Oh, so at where I work, we have, during COVID, they've been doing these like sort of social hours where people are like sort of hanging out and chatting and stuff, and most of them have happened on Teams. But one of them happened in a VR space that me and my team had made, and basically you could walk around and look at art and you could play with blocks, and that was it. There's the only things you could do. And it was amazing to me how much just like a bunch of adults playing with blocks changed everything about the way they interacted with each other. All you could do with these blocks was like change the size and color and stick them together. That was it. It was in VR, so they like floated in the air and stuff. But it really changed people into this like joyful, playful mindset and got them out of the like Zoom fatigue mode of like performing sociality and like performing attention for other people. So yeah, that's my ramble on your question. Sorry, ramble.
Well, that's a really good answer. I really like this idea of play and bringing the joy back into distance interaction.
Mm-hmm.
From chat, from Henry, it's hard to beat a big empty cardboard box for creative possibility. Signed, a cat. I think speaking to the point of play, right? If you buy a cat toy, you take the toy out of the box, you try to give the toy to the cat. The cat doesn't want the toy. The cat is in the box, right? That's how cats work, and I think there's something really playful and I don't know. I don't think maybe box gives cat agency in the sense the toy might not, because it's freeing. And actually, on this point that you just made, if I may, I'm going to just read this quotation from your opinion, your op-ed in Wired magazine from I think 2 months ago, and I think this is something that is so all engineers should hear. Right? It won't come naturally at first. The tech, the social norms, and the physical aspects of incorporating VR into your sequestered work life need to be practiced and learned. How? With years of experience under our belts, my team has learned that it all comes down to play. While play is a skill prized by artists, makers, and educators, professionals tend to banish it from their serious work. So we took strategies from the arts and reshaped them to serve our spatial work needs. We developed ways of having productive and memorable meetings in VR by making sculptures illustrating our thoughts and conversations with shapes and notes in the air around us. Making, rearranging, adding to the sculptures as we talk lets each participant externalize their view on the topic and lets everyone else grab hold of these parts and move them into spatial relationships with other thoughts. This enables us to discover stories and roadmaps we would not have otherwise found. We chase down the unexpected, watching carefully and learning from serendipitous threads and interactions. We use our hands, making huge messes, to investigate non-linguistic knowledge and interpersonal connections. All of this happens because of an openness to play. So it's such a beautiful, beautiful paragraph. But the sentiment and the ethos behind this is something that I think is so needed in design, in engineering, in business, right? I mean, and I think an earlier comment said, I think what we were talking about, maybe regarding this non-exploitation and the platinum rules, that, maybe that would eliminate all marketing and sales industries. I don't know if it does. I don't know if it has to, honestly. I don't know. I think our system is certainly far from perfect. And without commenting on what's the best system, I feel like if we improve the actors within the system, it seems like that would be a net increase in the quality of the system, right? And in a way, I don't know, I think the play approach is one where it's not trying to say, let's have a revolution and change the system as a way to make the world better. Maybe that's needed, but it's about, I think it's educating ourselves to play, to learn to how we ourselves can design things for what we're to do in our jobs, in our play. I think if more people did that, I personally have to think that just makes the world better already. And then we can, maybe that's a step to addressing even bigger issues, and maybe all these things can happen at the same time. I'm rambling, but I don't know, but my mind is going, and I want to.
I would say I don't think that any of what I've brought up will kill sales or marketing. Sales or marketing don't care what they're selling or marketing. They will sell or market whatever you've got. They're really good at it. We're responsible for the whatever you've got part. Yeah, I'm so impressed with sales and marketing. They can make a story out of anything. It's very impressive. But yeah, it's at least, from my point of view, I am personally responsible for what they're putting out into the world and what gets seen and what gets shared. And as far as the playing as a form of work, I guess I would say two things. One is, how many Zoom meetings have you had in the last 6 months? And how many of them can you remember distinctly? Like you can really remember like, oh, that one time that we did this thing. Like it's a very few of them, if any. But one thing when you like take on this, when you take on spatial meetings and when you take on the idea of play, the two things that happen is that like suddenly every meeting you're in is in a different space because the play of that meeting creates the space that it's in. So if you're creating these sculptures like I was saying, and like you guys are moving them around, like your body is working, but then at the end of that meeting what you end up with is this, what I like to call a deployable mess.
I love that.
So like when you're talking about the slime in the chat, like your kid likes the slime because of the mess, like you also like the mess. It's just that you are the one responsible for cleaning it up. But if you have an environment where you get to make as many messes as you want, and then you can save them and then like reopen them whenever you want, it completely changes your relationship to material play. So like you get to have this environment where you're talking about this topic and you have all of these things in front of you and you get to really explore that, and play lets you really open that space up. It just changes like the brain state that you're in a way that lets you get to much more innovative shit much quicker. Sorry, I cussed.
All good.
And also like it makes work into something enjoyable and not drudgery, which I'm sure a lot like no work is going to be good all the time, but like joy is important in the world, and play not only gives you joy, but it actually gives you better ideas. So like, why not do it?
I don't even know what to say. I am inspired by your words and just the ethos behind them. And I think this seems like a great moment to actually do a little playing. So we began 14 weeks ago, Artful Design TV with a group dance. So we're going to end season 1 with a group dance, and in the spirit of play. And before we do that, send us your feedback and suggestions, and they're on the website. And let me get this ready for this. I think y'all who have danced with us before know how to do this. Others who have not, it's real easy. Just move in whatever way is comfortable to you, and kind of let the music guide you here.
Make sure to feel silly.
Feel silly, feel good, and feel yourself. Let me get rid of this so you can see. Okay, so now if I do that, so remember from the very first episode, we have this meme from like 20 years ago, right? At the beginning of the internet. And in fact, we're kind of back to the stage, are we not, right? We're just low resolution pixels on someone else's screen. And I feel like this seems like an apt moment, and an apt way, I think, to end the season. So I think everyone knows what to do. There's going to be a drop. And when that drop happens, move in whatever way is comfortable for
Hello?
All right. Everyone, thank you so much. And thank you so much for this season of Artful Design TV. And Em, thank you so much for being with us today and for everything you do. I leave today with hope. This is going to be one of the Zoom sessions I will remember from quarantine because of what you said. So, and also just...
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And thank you, Jack, for moderating. Thank you, Kungwoo, for co-hosting, co-organizing, editing all these videos, and for and really working with me together to make Artful Design TV happen. And thanks to everyone out there for being part of this community. We will be back. We have so much more to explore, but please think about what Em has said today, and their Medium articles and the Wired article are linked from the archive. So please go check those out. And with this, everyone stay healthy, stay safe, stay playful. Thanks, everyone.